Well, thank you all so much for coming tonight. What a wonderful crowd. Tonight is the final Poet-in-Residence reading of the fall semester, and I want to just take this opportunity to thank the English department and academic affairs who supports the series financially and in all other kinds of really wonderful ways. I just also want to let you know if you've missed any of the readings, which I'm sure some of you have, you can go to the English department website. We have a tab, reading series, and there you'll find a video archive of all the readings we've had since our first one in the fall of 2010. In a few weeks, it'll be updated to reflect the spring semester readings as well, so do check back often and keep an eye out. We hope to have some really wonderful readers in the spring. Tonight's reader is Marianne Choquet. Marianne was born and raised in Dubuque, Iowa. She obtained a BA in English Lit from the University of Iowa and went on to travel, live, and work around the world. While abroad, she acquired a Certificate de Lange Franciase from the University of Paris-Sorbonne and an MA in Literature and Cultural Studies from the University of Barcelona. Marianne is in the process of completing her PhD, which is a combination of her novel and a critical exegesis of the novel, and she will be defending it early next year. We wish her luck. After 24 years away from Dubuque. Marianne is back in Dubuque, Iowa. She's an adjunct professor here at the University of Dubuque. She teaches 101 and 090. Some of you are in her class, yeah? Maybe? Okay. Marianne is also, right now, my housemate, which means I have lots of dirt. But it also means she has lots of dirt. So I'm going to leave that out of it. It's been wonderful having another writer in the house. I see her, typing away or scribbling furiously in her journal or doing that writer thing where you sort of stare really intensely at nothing. It's great. And we have these great conversations about craft and writing and gender and living abroad and coming home. Obviously, lots of things we have in common. And these themes, of course, are not just concerns of her life, but also inevitably arise in her work. Tonight, I'm excited to finally hear an excerpt of the novel and a PhD dissertation, her book entitled Lucy Go See. Please join me in welcoming Madame Marianne Choquet.
Okay. I think it's the first time I've been referred to as a madame. So thank you all for coming. Thank you, Lauren, for inviting me to do this. Thank you, John Bars, for inviting me to UD, coming home, inviting me back home. The novel that is part of my PhD is a Bildungsroman that's based on a quest. And a Bildungsroman is a coming-of-age novel, more or less. But this one is more of a coming-to-voice novel. I don't know if I can keep these. I used Pilgrim's Progress. I don't know if any of you have read The Pilgrim's Progress, is the structure that I used to outline it. So what I'm going to read to you today is the prologue and chapter 1. Can everybody hear me all right? Okay, yeah. And in quest nature, the chapter 1 would be the setting up of the ordinary world before the hero goes out is called to adventure. And in the Bildungsroman, it would be more or less the same. The Bildungsroman is generally a character that grows up in the country, that is bookish, that's different than everyone else in his or her family, and goes off to the city to grow up. So, Lucy Go See, and here's the prologue. And maybe I need these, maybe not. These are the things she knew. Joy was a house to be lived in, with laughter as its guardian. Sorrow and anger visited, but Lucy would not let them stay. It was a mobile home, her house of joy. Its walls were her skin. She knew she was different, that she was born with desires no one around her seemed to have. And because she was just one sapling in a massive forest of relatives, rooted and thriving where they were, it seemed the problem surely lay with her. And she became nervous, as what she knew did not fit with what she saw. Was she in the wrong place? She knew, too, that nature knew the way to be. She knew the solace of trees, the openness of pastures and meadows, the enthusiasm of brooks, rivers, streams, the beauty of growth in all stages, the triumph of flowering, the following decay, the warmth of the sun, the strength of the wind, the cleansing rain, the pristine nature of snow, the color of fall. Excuse me, it's very small. She saw there was pain, and she saw love eased it. She knew she was pretty, and she knew she was smart. And she knew she was pretty, and she knew she was smart, and she saw that most everyone wanted her to think she was not that pretty and not that smart. She wanted to prove to the world and herself that all she knew was true. She wanted them to apologize for not having recognized all that was in her. She wanted to go and see what lay beyond the rolling green hills of the upper Mississippi Valley, and she wished she could take all those she loved with her, which she did, for she was made of them. Lucy wanted to sculpt her life in much the same way she shaped the rain. In much the same way she shaped the earth after rain as a girl. For her life was to be play and her work to be play, earnest, serious play. If there was a God, he was a benevolent one. She knew that too. And the only thing she saw right in the church was the singing. She saw death left behind the shell of a body, that mobile home discarded. It was obvious the spirit fled it, though she didn't know where it went. Yet she could feel her pioneering ancestors, both around and inside of her. She listened more to the voice inside than the multitude hawking their wares out. She knew, too, that what most people called love was not, and that love was not easy. And she knew that desire was something altogether different, too. She had a feeling that sex was much more important than anyone seemed to realize, and even more powerful than anyone had already imagined. She sensed it was at the base of creation, not to be messed with without messing up the whole system. And she knew when her grandfather kneaded her breast as he hugged her, that something in the system was obviously very messed up. Chapter 1. The first inkling, chapter 1 is called Miss Something or Other. Okay. So the first inkling of a way out came via envelope, handed off by a departing spectator after the Twins-Astros game in St. Paul. A breeze cut through the heat in the shaded seats of the stands. It smelled like spilled pop and cool cement. Lucy's two brothers and dad were in the dugout visiting her uncle and meeting the players. Her two sisters were back in Iowa. Viola Pilgrim looked over her daughter's shoulder. "What's that?" Lucy showed her mother the Miss Teenage America application she had just unfolded. Viola wrinkled up her nose, then darted her eyes around. "Who gave you that?" Lucy lifted her chin toward a man exiting the stadium. "Him." Viola glanced, already shaking her head in rapid disapproval. "Throw it away. That's all you need, is to be getting yourself mixed up with characters like that." Lucy was already engrossed in the fine print. The guy had looked as normal as any other to her. She thought her mother was a suspicious woman who would do what she could to keep her captive, like a sort of Cinderella in a tower, only letting her out for chores or family activities. She was surprised, and not, that someone considered her Miss Something or Other material. She believed she was good-looking, but as scarcely anyone else mentioned it. "You clean up real nice, Lulu." was the biggest compliment doled out, and that by her dad, she had begun to doubt. Now here was proof of some kind of attractiveness, though she was unable to compete for the prize, which was just as well, because there was no way anyone would get Lucy in sequins twirling batons. Her brothers Blaze and Ease bounded up the stairs carrying freshly autographed baseballs like prized gems, their father close behind. Lucy raised her eyes and then slid the application toward Tom Pilgrim's firm, round stomach. "Look." He glanced at the title. "You're not a teenager yet, are you, babe?" "I will be in November. Anyway, it's only for Minnesota residents." He waved it away and looked out over the empty ball diamond. "Then just forget about it. There's no sense in thinking about what you can't have or can't do." Lucy watched his eyes for any arrow of sadness. She always wondered if he regretted giving up on professional baseball to raise a family, and if it was painful for him to now watch his younger brother on the field. Yet all she ever saw was joy and pride where his brother was concerned, and right then, a longing for the field and the play. She admired his acceptance. His choice was unfathomable to her, yet she knew she would not be without it. She folded and rolled the application and then slid it into the front pocket of her jean shorts like a bullet, thinking, "I'm a Ms. anyway." As she lay in the back of the station wagon watching the sky on the ride home, she wondered if what had inspired that man to consider her a contestant could be her ticket out of the cornfields. Could the way she looked, alone, be enough to take her the places she wanted to go? For the time being in Iowa, her life was junior high in the city and home in the country. Lucy kept to herself, mostly in both places. She loved her afternoons wandering in the woods with the squirrels, sitting by the streams, molding the silt, and laying flat out on the hills, watching birds, butterflies, and clouds. Evenings, she walked across the yard to her grandparents' house to help Grandma Pilgrim bathe and prepare for bed. As Lucy emptied, then cleaned the bedpan, her grandmother watched from the tub. "Honey, you should work in a nursing home." Lucy shook her head as she flushed the toilet. "I do this for you, Grandma." This was the woman who had taught Lucy to read when she was 4, who stuffed butterscotch drops and dollar bills in her hand when she brought her the paper, who told her the family history, whose eyes glistened when Lucy offered bouquets of hand-picked violets. Lucy enjoyed the nightly ritual of carrying her a small plate of crackers, a pitcher of iced water, and painkillers for her arthritis. After she swallowed them, Marie Pilgrim rocked back and forth on her bed while Lucy caressed her back. "I'm going to see the world, Grandma. That is what I am going to do." "Grandma?" Oh, no, Marie smiled. "I'd just like to go somewhere. Ask your mother if she goes into town if I can go along, even if it's just to sit in the car." "Grandma, did you ever want to see the world?" Grandma Pilgrim sighed as if to say, "If you only knew how much. Honey, I could get on a bus and ride and never come back." Lucy wondered what kept her there. She imagined it was family. "She looks so pretty, so at peace. She looks so good, Ernst," some offered with condolences at Grandma Pilgrim's wake. Lucy, now 14, watched her grandfather stare at his wife's lifeless head on that ivory silk pillow, how he looked like a horse struggling with a bit, and how he winced, and she wanted to scream. "What the hell is the matter with you people? Pretty? Good? She's dead." She felt comforted when her mother stood behind her while she was kneeling in front of her grandmother's body, trying to figure out if her lips were glued shut. Viola put her hand on Lucy's shoulder. "Touch her, if you want." Lucy was shocked by the cold hardness of the body, but didn't flinch. It only confirmed for her that her grandmother wasn't in there. She stood up and wandered through the funeral parlor, a Victorian mansion formerly owned by one of the city's pioneer industrialists. Back out in a den off the viewing room, where the closest family members gathered, she poked her head in. "Isn't it funny that they laid dead bodies out in what was once someone's living room?" Nobody laughed. Lucy sighed and wondered why. Didn't they know how good it felt? Could they not see how much easier it made life? Graveside, it became clear to Lucy that her grandfather was in trouble. She had never seen emotion in him, and he was overcome. She watched Ernst palm one corner of the casket and not let go, and then was both horrified and awestruck by her own father's ability to lift his own father's hand so his mother's body could be lowered into the ground. She gazed at her grandfather's face, bathed in tears, casing his movements as he climbed into the grave and walked around every corner of it, checking that the casket was sealed and secured, as if he were tucking his wife into bed. Lucy was so nailed by his grief, she could not move. She stood with the taste of salt in her mouth, perspiring, staring at her scarred, trembling knees, and then smiled a smidge, noticing the reflection of the tall cedars and blue sky in the silver buckles on her shoe. She liked to think her grandma made her look. Out of a sense of duty and a need to fill the hole left by Marie's passing, Lucy slipped in one night like a cat and sat on the floor in front of her grandfather's recliner as he watched the news. If he was downstairs, she lit on a stool in his workshop. Watching the way he could make any broken thing work, simply by taking it apart, studying it, and putting it back together, made her believe she could too. When he was working in the garden or pasture, Lucy sat on her grandmother's bed and touched the pillow or fingered the cut glass doorknob where her cane still hung, opened her closet and smelled her clothes. Even though she went to Methodist Sunday service with Ernst and to the Congregationalists with her mom's mom, Grandma Bigheart, in town on Saturday nights, her parents still insisted she attend the Catholic Mass. "I don't think God really cares which church I go to," she protested. "Or even if I go, for that matter. All I do is sit there and think about everything else." Her father lifted his hands. "Then it's good for that." Lucy saw his point, but she would have preferred an empty church in which to be alone with her supposed maker, rather than one crowded with hypocrites. As she grew, her grandfather began to pass his large hand along her thigh and then slap it. "You've got legs just like your grandmother's. You're built just like her." This petrified the girl, but she told herself that it was harmless, even though it didn't feel that way. She felt a certain quivering around her leg, like a thick plasma spreading and fixing itself into a transparent coating. Not wanting to believe what she felt, she blinked it into impossibility, shook it off, willed numbness onto it, which of course didn't work. She began to sit or stand a little farther away when talking to him, but always gave him a hug goodnight. He needed a hug. Goodnight was the way she saw it. One evening, when she opened her arms and wrapped them around him, he slipped his hand between their bodies and kneaded her breast. He had strong hands, the size of dinner plates. It hurt her. She had no idea what to do, but she knew what he was doing was wrong. She teetered back, and he let go. Her breast felt like it was being released from a sort of branding wrench. With her glistening eyes down, she decided to pretend it hadn't happened, at least for the time being, until she figured out what to do. And she walked to the door as normally as she always did, and then walked home, stunned, even more numb, her heart both breaking and aching. He wanted to touch a breast, she guessed, and there had been hers in front of him. That at least seemed to be the best-case scenario, and the only thing to do, it seemed, was dust it off and find a way to carry on. The thought of telling her parents, because if she told anyone it would be them, only brought images of pain. She couldn't even imagine being able to speak the words rising in her. "Grandpa squeezed my breast really hard and acted like it was normal and didn't even say he was sorry." That, she knew, would officially ruin her idyllic image of their relationship. She loved her grandfather the way she loved her whole family, like a task. She knew love was not a feeling. It was work. It was what one did, how one lived, and it was easier with some people than others. Being close to her grandfather also made her feel special in a world where she often felt overlooked. She wanted one of those tender relationships between strong, wise, caring grandfather and curious, smart, brave granddaughter that she had read about and seen in movies. In her determination to make one, Lucy kept showing up for the job and darting, dashing, or ducking when need be. When she did hug him, she covered her breasts with one arm and wrapped the other around him. She hoped he would get the hint. Mostly he did. Yet a certain sickness lingered inside of her whenever she thought about what she was hiding in order to be close to him. That felt wrong too, and made her feel dirty somehow. But the fact that she successfully shielded herself made her feel less guilty. At 15 and 5'9", she was 6 inches taller than her petite and curvy mother, but still 4 inches shy of her broad father and grandfather. With money she made babysitting, she opened a checking account and subscribed to the fashion magazines she'd seen at the beauty parlor. When they didn't arrive in the mailbox, she found them hidden in the hall closet. She stormed up to her mother, waving them in the air. "Why are you hiding these?" Viola turned from the African violet she was watering in the kitchen windowsill. "That's a waste of money on useless crap. How many times do I already have to tell you to get your nose out of some book and do something?" Lucy, who knew something, meant either setting the table for 7, peeling and chopping vegetables, vacuuming, dusting, scrubbing, cleaning toilets, washing mirrors, shining silver, or ironing, went livid. "I'll mow the lawn, I'll shovel snow, I'll walk the garbage across the road. Let them come inside and do what I do." She was talking about her brothers, of course, but she may as well have been talking to the apple trees in the backyard for all the response she received. She let the screen door slam behind her. Leafing through the magazines down in the pasture, Lucy saw modeling as a fabulous ticket out. What enticed her was how happy, independent, and cosmopolitan the young women looked. That and the vast piles of cash she heard they made, of course. She too wanted to stand in the middle of busy sidewalks in Tokyo, take Japanese baths, walk with elephants in Kenya, all while wearing fabulous clothes and getting paid for it. She looked up at the house, seething at her mother, marched back up the hill, and then slipped inside, upstairs to the kids' bathroom. She stood in front of the mirror, comparing the models' faces and bodies with hers, and saw no reason why she could not be among them. She thought of the Miss application she still kept in her drawer. Her older sister, Ruby, looked in. "Don't you have anything better to do than stand around staring at yourself in the mirror?" Lucy raised a shoulder. "Not at this moment, no." When Lucy saw a feature of Candace, a tall and very pretty girl from New York who had just transferred to her high school, in the fashion section of the local paper, she waited until Candace was alone in front of her locker and then handed her the paper. "How did you do that?" "I'm taking modeling classes, and the woman who teaches arranged the job." Lucy looked her up in the phone book as soon as she got home that afternoon. Viola was on her way out the door to the grocery store and was surprised by Lucy's offer to go along to help. Afterwards, as they were leaving the parking lot, Lucy pointed to a building nearby. "Would you stop there for a minute? I'd like to get some information about a school." "What kind of school?" Lucy braced herself. "It's about self-improvement and beauty, and they give modeling classes." Her mother glared. "Would you just forget about all that phony bullshit?" "Mom, please, I just want to talk with them by myself. It'll only take a minute." Viola parked. "I'm not waiting here forever." Lucy sprung out of the car. The front walls and door of the agency were glass. A well-dressed woman talking on the phone behind a desk motioned for Lucy to come in. As Lucy waited, the door swung open again, and the most un-Iowan woman she had ever seen, with cropped red hair and flawless skin, sashayed in with a briefcase, knocking her knuckles on one of her breasts. "These things are hilarious." She looked at Lucy, who was already wondering where she could get a set. "I'm breastfeeding. They're breast cups." She circled Lucy then, smiling and nodding. "You must be here for the modeling course." Lucy didn't know how much either woman knew about fashion and modeling, but she did know they were more sophisticated than she was, as she stood there looking down at her jeans, button-down shirt, yellow rain slicker, and plastic boots. She glanced at the clock and then waved the price lists and information brochure as she dashed toward the door. "I really have to go. My mom is waiting." The woman's eyes widened. "She didn't come with you?" Viola wasn't there. Lucy didn't care. She was glad to have gotten where she wanted to go, and she knew her mother would turn up eventually. As she contemplated calling her father just to stir things up, Viola charged in, slashing through the puddles. She slammed on the brakes and stared straight ahead. Lucy slunk into the car, shut the door, and heard for the umpteenth time, "Don't you think I have anything better to do than chauffeur you around?" "Why don't you let me drive by myself, then?" Lucy knew her mom wouldn't answer that. She watched the headlights of the approaching cars blur and refract through the rain sliding down the windshield, and waited until they were on the road to say more. "I would like to take this modeling course." A moment's silence, as if she was considering it, then Lucy watched the veto happen in her mother's brain. "I don't know why you need to go to school for such a thing. With all the brains you're supposed to have, why don't you use them?" "Supposed?" Lucy thought, as Viola proclaimed. "I'm not paying for it." Lucy shrugged. "I will." Her first job was a television commercial for a trucking company. In jeans, cowboy boots, and hat, she climbed into a semi-cab, tossed off a few lines, and then pulled the horn with a big smile. Her father shouted, "It's Lulu," every time it came on. Her mother shook her head rapidly, as if we're all headed in the wrong direction fast, and the rest of the family paid no attention. Lucy happily took the check to the bank. Then the local newspaper booked her for a fashion shoot on the Delta Queen. A furrier paid her to stand in a fur coat next to a limousine. Furniture companies paid her to stand next to couches. It was so easy and fun and gloriously paid compared to new part-time job at the department store. But she had to agree with her mother. Not much of her brain was involved. At that point, she didn't care. She enjoyed walking the runway for mall fashion shows and smiling down at all those who had not voted for her for class president, not invited her to their parties or cliques. On Mondays, she often heard girls talking near their lockers about their weekend sexual experience in words that disgusted her, telling and asking each other if they had been porked. And although Lucy had little interest in pig sex, she was curious as to what all the whispers and giggling were covering. Not just at school, but everywhere. Sex seemed so delinquent and important at the same time. Her mother had told her it was for babies alone, but all the hullabaloo and desperation surrounding it told Lucy there was more than propagation involved. She decided to approach it as an equation and set about deducing its unknown values. She looked around and chose the handsomest young man, an athlete a couple of years older than her, and set her sights on him. She waited until it seemed like he loved her, and as for her, love was a task she could perform with whomever she chose. She found it fitting enough that he was clean, pleasant, and fun. Sex, she found, or penetration more precisely, was rather boring and painful at first. That's it. Did not seem the right thing to say up there in her room with her boyfriend while her parents were away. She did not wonder if her lack of pleasure in the act had anything to do with the rather heartless algebraic approach. Lucy had organized love and sex like divisions of labor, even though she imagined they'd fit best in the same department. Hence, she did her best to apply love to sex through romantic gestures she learned on television, in movies and novels, not yet knowing that Eros came to town all on its own. Could her grandfather's abuse have had something to do with her separation of love and sex? She was unaware. Whenever she thought of it, she would find herself humming, "One of these things is not like the other. One of these things just doesn't belong." For her, sex became research on the pleasure of touch. The rest of her time she was caught up in making something of herself in her life, and she felt it was good to have a fun jock of a boyfriend while doing so. Until she found out her bed was not the only one he shared. The months of lies no teeny aside, it was also a combination of hygienic and practical issues that killed it for her. There was even chemistry involved. Lucy knew two essences required a closed vessel to do their best work. After that disappointment, she slipped another coat of armor over the first. Deeper pleasures rippled in her groin when she was in nature, or in her nature, feeling good in her skin, happy and working on something exciting, sculpting or drawing, or even reading. A party scene in a novel in which a woman, dressed in a tuxedo, was flirting with the woman next to her, turned Lucy on so much she read it again and again. as did another scene in another novel where a married mother blisses out during a secret summer affair with a young man at her cottage. The daring play across borders and limits thrilled her. Yet it scared Lucy to realize she was attracted to women. Society certainly made it uneasy to explore that, she thought. When her modeling teacher joked, "God, imagine how exhausting it is to be bisexual. Everybody turns you on," Lucy sighed and wondered what kind of exhausting life awaited her, because it seemed to her that it was life itself that turned her on. This arousal seemed too volatile and unheard of to be trusted. And why did people have to label their sexuality? Lucy wondered. Why couldn't they just live it? She deferred the rushes and vibrations mounting in her because she had never heard of sex talked about in the way it seemed to be coming alive in her, and she wondered if there was something wrong with her. She found she was attracted to authorities, teachers, managers, professors, people she wanted to be, who had qualities she wanted to develop in herself. Some let her close to them, privately, and at the risk of arrest. One recent divorcee, 25 years her senior, initiated her to the arts of non-reproductive lovemaking. He cared for her too, it must be said, but he had to drop her. One might say Lucy slanted all of her experiments toward proving her hypothesis that men would only hurt her. She simply followed her feeling. Males could be her friend, she noticed, until sex was involved. It seemed she would have to choose between love and sex, and she felt safer not loving. In the span of a couple of years, Lucy concluded that her desire was more powerful than its consummation, and the best she could do was carry a good shield. What she couldn't understand, though, was why more boys her own age did not ask her out. Her brother Blaise suggested a possible reason. If you didn't talk, they would. This only puzzled her more. The summer after she graduated from high school, she begged her mother to let her visit Candace, who was modeling in Chicago. Her mother shouted, "You're only 17 years old. Do you have any idea what can happen to you in a city that size?" But when Lucy said, "I'm your daughter, what could possibly happen that I can't handle?" she let her go. After looking through a pile of Candace's portfolio pictures, Lucy felt wistful, wondering again if modeling could give her the worldly life she was dreaming about. It seemed like such a risk. She also thought about the acceptance letters she had received from the University of Iowa. She still wanted to travel, but she also wanted a college education. She could feel Candace's eyes on her profile as she heard her kind voice. "You could make a living doing this, you know." Lucy turned. "You really think so?" Yeah, you just need pictures and an agent. You have a great nose." A nose model." They both laughed. "But I want to go to college, and tuition to any university in Chicago is out of the question." That August, she packed up her bags. Her mother and grandmother were waiting on lawn chairs in the sun as she loaded the trunk. Lucy dangled the keys. "I'll drive." Viola stood. "I am driving my daughter to college. You can just drop me at the dorms." Viola, who didn't believe that a college education was as important as her husband did, flipped. "Did you ever think that it might mean something to your mother and grandmother to take you out to lunch and spend a little time with you when we take you off to college for the first time?" Grandma Bigheart, who, like Grandma Pilgrim, had never had a driver's license, raised her index finger in the air. "I only finished the 8th grade, honey. My mother made me quit school to stay home and help her. The proudest days of my life were when I saw my daughter graduate from high school and when I saw her driving a car. Now, look at you." Lucy lifted her arms in truce, hung her head in mock shame, and then glanced at Viola, who days before had called her her problem child. "I thought you'd be happy to get rid of me." "You really get some damn dumb ideas in your head." During lunch, while her mother was in the ladies' room, Lucy asked what she had been wondering throughout the ride. "When did you leave home, Grandma? How long did you have to take care of everyone?" Willa Bigheart sipped her iced tea, set it back on the table. "I was 20. I'd been taking care of my brothers and sisters since I was 13. We lived out in the boonies. I know it's not kind to bad talk the dead, But my mother was not a kind woman. One day, your grandpa was coming to pick me up. I was wearing what we called knickers then, short pants just below the knees, which were the fashion. My mother told me I wasn't going anywhere in those. Your grandpa drove up in his jalopy, and I got in and rode into town with him. Never looked back, never went back. Lucy raised her glass. Cheers to you, Grandma. So that's chapter 1. I don't know if I have time to. Took longer than thought. I was going to read some of chapter 8, but those were the numbers that came to me. Chapter 8 is much farther along in Lucy's journey. She's in Asia. She's gone to college and finished and gotten married and been given a... And now she's in Hong Kong by herself. And this chapter is called The Ground Held Her Tailbone. Yeah. On the plane, Lucy looked into the clouds and thought her oddest fear was that of feeling the same comfort with Julian that she did with Vic. Why did it scare her to feel as comfortable with both men? Because she'd married Vic, in part for that feeling, and now it appeared she could have married herself instead. Green, smooth mountains appeared in view, pastel high-rises thrust from the ground. Lucy smiled, thinking how they looked like the refrigerator box houses she and her brothers and sisters had cut out and painted in the driveway. Modern highways split and curved into the ancient landscape. Welcome to Hong Kong, it is 88 degrees Fahrenheit, the pilot announced as the plane skimmed over the buildings of Central and North Point. Lucy took a taxi to Central, left her passport and necessary papers at the Japanese consulate, and then walked from their air-conditioned offices out into the wet heat. People moved rapidly around her like busy ants. Street workers crawled in and out of trenches in between sidewalks and bamboo scaffolding. Fruit vendors carried their wares in boxes strung around their necks. Red, blue, and green double and single-deck trams clattered down the middle of the street, clanging. Bicycles darted in and out, their bells ringing. Lucy walked amidst the sound of drills, hammers, and shouting voices, mesmerized by the otherworldliness. She passed wooden barrels filled with fruits and nuts next to tan rotary telephones sitting on tables, with signs saying they were free for public use. She doubted she could sit down and call Iowa or Chicago or Osaka. She didn't want to anyway. She walked on. Live chickens hung upside down on strings. A man teased snakes, bit off their heads, spat them into his hand, drained their mouths, and auctioned the liquid as an elixir. People dressed in designer clothes, wearing gold sunglasses, gold watches, and gold chains, clipped past this spectacle without looking twice. There were greasy cafes next to two-story fancy restaurants, markets with rows of tables piled with fabrics of every color and texture imaginable. Come early evening, Lucy stretched her legs on a wooden bench at the back of Star Ferry and rowed across the harbor from Hong Kong Island to Kowloon, the mainland. The sea breeze dried the perspiration covering her body. Junks with their high sterns and four-cornered sails floated by, passenger ferries, tankers, small sailboats, immense yachts, cargo ships, and tiny fishing boats steered by a single man sailed about the harbor. Victoria's Peak loomed above the congested high-rises of the island as the sun dropped behind the haze. Lucy watched an old man relaxing on his haunches at the back of a small wooden boat, anchored in the middle of the harbor, smoking a cigarette and looking out over the water in thought. She was struck by his flexibility. She wondered what it took to maintain that, because she too wanted to be able to sit on her haunches at 70. After the ferry docked, she walked into the nearest hotel. It was posh and too expensive, but she liked the bar, woody, accented with hanging plants. Foreigners dominated the scene. Lucy watched, trying not to stare, as she leaned back in a leather armchair, sipping from a frosty glass of beer. Many different languages were being spoken by faces and body in so many different colors, shapes, and sizes, yet the same feeling of unwinding permeated the room. Lucy wondered what she would do if she saw Vic or Julian walk in, and was relieved when it occurred to her that she preferred neither did. Content to be with herself, she wanted to continue walking and seeing. She considered not sleeping, but her feet were aching. Her thin-soled sandals were melting, eaten up by the hot pavement. She was sweaty, dirty, tired. Throughout the day, images of living alone, many relationships, and limitless options collided with warm memories of the home and life she and Vic had made together. She wondered if she had screwed it all by telling him. What exactly was that it, however? She told herself that if he loved her, he would at least try to understand. Yet, then that mind of hers asked the next logical question. How could she be doing this if she loved him? Me first is what came. I am doing this for me, and it has nothing to do with him, but he may benefit from it. It was an outrageous reach for her, which felt right and selfish. She checked into the Empress, the closest hotel she considered affordable in Simshatsui. "We will need your passport, please," the young woman at the reception desk said after Lucy handed her the American Express card. "It's at the Japanese consulate." Lucy showed the papers they had given her that afternoon. Up in her room, after a long, cool bath, she sat on the bed in front of the oblong, ornate mirror, looking at herself, at someone else she found interesting. She looked leaner, sharper, more mature. Here I am on the other side of the world, alone, exploring. Maybe I really don't need anyone. Then she called room service and loved watching a young man in a tuxedo roll a silver tray into her room, bow, then lift a silver dome and serve her a cheeseburger and fries on china. After her meal, she called Vic again and then hung up when she heard the answering machine. It was 7 a.m. in Chicago. She wondered if he was sleeping elsewhere. She picked up the remote, pressed a button at random. A pretty Chinese woman in a red suit gave the stock report in English, with a perfect English accent. Fascinated, Lucy changed channels to watch other Chinese male and female faces speaking English with English accents. It jarred her. She wanted to tell them to stop. They looked like puppets on the wrong hand. The receptionist called the next morning. "I'm sorry, but your American Express card was not approved." "That's very strange. I will be right down." Lucy hasn't used it since she left Chicago. Most of her money was at the agency in Osaka. She called Vic, who was still not there. This time she left a message with this news. In the shower, she budgeted the 9,000 yen she was carrying, just enough to pay for the room. She had 2 nights and 3 days to go before she could pick up her visa and get her plane back to Osaka. At least they don't have my passport, but they know where it is, and I told them I would go there to pick it up on Monday, she thought as she imagined sneaking out. When the receptionist tried the card again, it bleeped as unapproved again. Lucy fidgeted. "Is there an American Express office nearby?" "Yes, there is, right over on Jordan Road. Here is the address." Lucy walked out without paying, pretending she would come back, but knowing she wouldn't, if she couldn't get the office to approve the card. She had never done such a thing, but she didn't know what else to do. "This card has been canceled by the primary holder." "My husband." Lucy had trouble with the pronunciation of the word. The woman nodded. Lucy thought how ironic it was that telling him the truth had led him to distrust her. That also took care of the guilt she had been feeling in one fell swoop. Tina Turner singing "What's Love Got to Do With It" came to mind as she walked out onto the street. It was only 10 and already hot. The strap of her backpack cut into her sunburned shoulder. Other than the yen, she was carrying a pen, a notebook, clean underwear, and a deck of cards. Her feet were pink, swollen, and bleeding in places. She saw a sign with an arrow pointing in the direction of the Kowloon Canton Railway and thought, why not? At Sha Tin, she stepped off the train and followed another sign pointing toward 10,000 Buddhas. She climbed 460 stone stairs barefoot, up the side of a mountain, then sat under an ancient eucalyptus tree, at a rock table and chair, amongst singing birds and teeming insects, the faint traffic noise 300 meters below. Sweat drenched her silk tank top. Her feet pulsed. She wondered where she would sleep. She told herself to just keep going. It would become clear. In an outhouse nearby, she relieved herself in a hole in the ground, then cleaned herself with a leaf. As she passed under a stone archway, sheets and cotton shirts, a load of whites hung from a string between trees on the other side, yet there was no one in sight. Then she spotted the temple entrance. It was made of gray stone, framed in red with gold Chinese characters etched upon it. Lucy passed through it to an open courtyard where the interior walls were painted cyan blue. A procession of Buddhas traversed the roof of a shrine at the far end. Underneath it was the embalmed body of the monk who established the temple, covered in gold leaf and sitting inside a glass case. Lucy walked around and saw that each of the 10,000 Buddhas on the ground was unique. One looked like a woman and wore gold. She was carrying a wand, sitting atop a royal blue half-dragon, half-dog. She sat under her. For the next 3 hours in that courtyard, her head and back pressed against the cool cement walls, leaves rustling in the eucalyptus tree above her, parakeets hopping from branch to branch. Her mind was an open, empty cage. After she descended the mountain, she met an English couple waiting at a bus station in front of the railroad station. "Will this one take me back to Simshat-Sui?" The man nodded as the woman told her it would. They asked her where she was from. The woman smiled. "Are you studying here?" "I've been working in Japan and came here to renew my visa and travel around for a few days." "Please tell me you're not staying in that awful place, that Chungking Mansions, where my children have stayed for $6 a night." "Where is that?" "I believe it's on Nathan Road, but I've heard simply terrible things about the place. Dark, tiny, shared showers and baths." "Have you stayed there?" "Most definitely not, my dear." As the woman's husband smiled, Lucy made a mental note of the address. A red double-decked bus appeared, then stopped at their feet. "This one will take you back to Kowloon on the scenic route." The man nodded, and Lucy climbed up the stairs, offered a handful of coins for the driver to choose from, and then sat near a window. After they skirted around Golden Hill Country Park, Lucy stepped off to step on another to ride it across Rambler Channel just because she liked the name. She was the only one on the bus, sitting in the middle back seat, looking out the window. The bus driver watched her throughout the ride. She changed again at the container terminal, staring at the barges lined up, imagined their port destinations around the world, then rode along the coast of Kowloon, once again mesmerized by the harbor, by the size of ships riding at anchor, docking and unloading, the movement among them, the distance they had traveled. It was the grand central station of the South China Sea, not as gilded, ordered, and embedded in stone. She stared at the small villages crammed into the sides of mountains and wondered if she could live like that, if she would ever feel at home in anything but open spaces, which also made her wonder how far one can really travel from where one starts. She rode the Star Ferry to Central, wishing she could ride all evening until morning. It made her want to have Grandma Pilgrim at her side. After a tram ride to Victoria's Peak and a stroll along its pine-lined paths at sunset, she walked back down the hill through thicker and thicker civilization. It seemed everywhere she looked, she saw jewelry stores and wedding rings. She stopped in Harry's bar and ordered a beer, then sat at a table for two. Why am I so afraid of him? She wondered about Julian, and kept coming back to the fear that she would never be enough for him. Again, until one is sufficiently in love with oneself, of course, it is always difficult to imagine how another can be. She found the Chungking Mansions and checked into a cell-like room. There was a cot against the wall, a small mirror on the wall, and one exposed light bulb, surrounded by cobwebs hanging from the middle of the cement ceiling. Lucy believed the spiders would stay in their web. She was only going to sleep there anyway. A Filipino man was talking to his young son in the room next door. Luna, the Filipino woman who managed the guest house, told Lucy the father and son lived there and were lucky to do so. Many others kept their belongings in locked cages near the port by day and slept in the cages at night. Lucy wondered how they had imagined their freedom when leaving their country. Had they known what hardship lay ahead, or had they been fooled? She didn't think it kind to ask, nor did she ask Luna that night when she went out with her and sat with friends of hers drinking beer in an island pub, watching the crowd, and pretending not to understand the men that sat down next to her and offered her drinks, dinners, trips. On Sunday, she woke early to ride a ferry to Lantau Island and from its prow watched the massive cluster of Hong Kong diminish and disappear. When they docked at Silvermine Bay, she boarded a speedy and rickety bus, sat in the back seat dodging branches that caught in the open window as they wound up and around the mountain to the place Luna told her she must visit. 600 meters above sea level, the bus slowed onto a gravel plateau and stopped in front of the gated entrance of the Po Lin Monastery. Lucy followed small wooden signs marked footpath past stables where Chinese children were riding horses. The air was light there at the top of the world. Lucy imagined herself as a tiny figure on the globe as she arrived at the summit of the fuzzy mountains and then rested in front of a small stone structure that looked like a shepherd's cove. Sheer clouds wafted in until the path she had trodden disappeared, totally enveloped in white. The clouds passed on, the shrubby knolls reappeared, and then the veil of white recovered the view of other mountains, sea, and small port villages. It went on like this for hours, Lucy watching. She felt as at peace as she had as a child in the woods, leaning against her favorite oak. Each time she attempted to rise, the ground held her tailbone like a magnet. So she let it. Warmth gathered and welled there. When the sun began to set, she walked back down the path, arriving in time to ride the last bus, to catch the last ferry from Silvermine Bay. She eyed security guards at the airport and was relieved when she passed through customs without being asked to pay the hotel bill. The first thing she did back in Osaka was take a long, lathery shower. Then she smoothed milk and honey lotion into her skin, dressed in her khaki adventure pants and turtleneck black sweater. While lacing her boots, the image of Julian waiting for her in bamboo moved her and made her smile. Now that she felt desire rising again, she realized how her days in Hong Kong had emptied her of it. She felt new and dashed out the door, breaking herself to a lively gait instead of a sprint. Barely able to sit still through the 5 stops on the metro, she picked at the tiny balls of wool on her sweater. The only other passenger in the car, an older Japanese man in a business suit, snapped his fingers, then pointed to her mess on the floor. Lucy gathered the lint and shoved it in her pocket. In the velvet of bamboo's reception area, she flashed her card and picked up the pen to sign in. A few lines above her signature, Julian, 007. She took the stairs 2 at a time to the VIP lounge where she saw he was sitting alone. When he turned and saw her, the warm welcome and delight in his eyes told her more than he ever had. She dropped into the booth. He nuzzled his nose into her hair and whispered, "I'm very happy to see you." Hours later, after her stories were told and they were back in his room, and as they kissed at the edge of his bed, fully clothed, Lucy eased him back onto it. As she lowered herself on top of him, the pounding felt like a smooth, heavy stone dropping into water, echoing deeply, concentrically, filling her with reverberating waves of ecstatic warmth, spilling out into the world. One of her favorite ways, and so quickly. She rolled to the side and then whispered, "That has never happened to me before. Like that, I mean. Still in my clothes, just from my desire." Julian lifted her face and looked into her eyes. "It's very important that you know it is not me that makes you feel like that. It is you. It is what you are giving me. It is yours." What was she giving him, she wondered? Her desire for him, her love of him, her excitement in any case. What amazed Lucy most, though, was the way Julian gave her pleasure back to her. Telling her she was the source, not him. She had always felt like a victim of desire, as if it was something outside of her, more powerful than her, that came to rest on her and was out of her control, or something the other had that she wanted, rather than that she herself contained the source of it, that in fact it was more about her than the other. She could take responsibility for her desire more clearly and joyfully with this understanding that it wasn't something that happened to her, but was something that came from her. She could use it constructively instead of always thinking of it as something she had to submit to or conquer. It was becoming clearer and clearer that it was the way she loved more than was loved that turned her on. A week later, while waiting for the train to go to work in Kobe, Lucy called her parents to wish them a happy wedding anniversary. Just by the way her father said, "How are you, honey?" she could tell that he sensed her predicament and knew it was time to face the rest of her life. As she stood there at the payphone watching three men slurping udon at a nearby noodle stand, Lucy wanted to tell her dad what was going on. "I'm hanging in there," was all she could say. The next day she talked to Captain, made a reservation, left Vic a message telling him not to bother to come to the airport. She'd take a taxi home. "So you've decided?" Julian salted the Macedonian dish, then looked in her eyes and raised his eyebrows for confirmation. She nodded. His movements slowed. "Well, I hope you'll be a good girl for yourself." Lucy cocked her head. "Please explain to me what a good girl is." "Be strong. Go your own way. Drive your own life. Do not let the energies and pressures of those around you steer you." Lucy listened, trying to picture her life without him in it. Julian leaned back and looked at her from a different angle, as if he too were sizing up what would soon be gone. "I had a dream yesterday morning. I was driving my car in Paris and was very happy. I was with someone I stayed very well with, but she didn't have a face in the dream. Her father's presence was there, telling me to take care of his daughter, that she was really loving me." Lucy closed her eyes. "I can't stay longer. I feel like I'm hanging in limbo." Julian nodded. She could see his Adam's apple swell as he swallowed. After the waiter cleared the plates, he slipped his fountain pen out of the inside pocket of her jean jacket, which he was now wearing, then spread a white napkin on the table between them. He drew 2 stick figures, then black arrows from one to the other. "You have this kind of relationship. One gives to the other, and then the other gives back. One always waiting to receive before giving to the other." He drew another stick figure farther away from the two, then an arrow from one that traveled on to the third. "Then you have this type. One gives to the other, and the other gives to another." Lifting his pen back to the two in the center, he drew arrows from each of them and joined their ends in the middle space above them. Drawing a spiral around that space, he said, "This is the best, each giving 100% and fireworks happening where it all meets." Lucy smiled. She loved the way they thought alike, though it annoyed her that he seemed to think he was the one that had it all figured out about relationships, and she had yet to learn. She knew both of them had work to do, room to grow. She pointed to the drawing. Much easier to draw than to put into practice. Julian wrote "theoretical" in the top left hand of the corner of the napkin, then slid it her way. She folded it, slipped it into her pocket. That night before sleep, she kissed him. "Why don't you beg me to stay?" He covered his forehead with a hand, looked at the ceiling. "I may as well pee in a violin." Lucy laughed as she traced his eyebrow. "Why a violin?" "Exactly." He wrapped his body around hers, and the way he held her so closely throughout the night told Lucy that perhaps he even loved her more than either of them knew. After one last job in Hiroshima, then amassing piles of yen into an envelope at the agency, after Modi, bamboo, and all of the other goodbyes had been said, Julian and Lucy sat in a private room of the elegant bar where Tommy had invited them, drinking whiskey on the rocks and listening to Tommy play the piano. Julian stretched his legs out on the booth, then rested the back of his head on Lucy's shoulder. She slipped her hand inside of his shirt. "Some day, some way," she whispered, and they looked at him, both believing and not what she'd said. He didn't seem to mind. In the hours before she left, she slept astride him, enclosed in his arms. At dawn, perched above him, she caressed his body, traced the lines of his face. Any movement away from him wrenched her. Again, she was surprised. She didn't think it would be this painful to leave him. She'd been telling herself he'd be a tender memory in her life and she'd go on. Now tears covered her face and body. He held her hips and softly spoke. "Go now, and don't look back." Lucy couldn't bear leaving without looking into his eyes. She pried one open with her thumb and forefinger. The intensity of his regard shot her hand down, as if he was saying, "How dare you peek into my pain?" Yet it was his pain that told her their relationship was meaningful to him. She curled into him and then slipped away from him. She dressed, watching him. He never opened his eyes. After opening the door, she paused, raised her finger above her shoulder, and pointed in the direction she was headed. She didn't look back. He would write that it was sunny with a warm west wind the day he woke up and she was gone. Thank you.